Hello ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to VUX World, the Practical Voice Podcast. This episode of VUX World is brought to you by BotMock. If you are looking for an easy to use, simplistic prototyping tool that will allow you to just get on with the job rather than having to learn the ropes and figure out how it works and all that kind of stuff. If you're looking for something that you can just open up, prototype in and get on with, then BotMock is the thing for you because it is easy to use, the interface is clean and crisp, you can colour code various parts of the conversation so you can organise your design, and your team can even get involved and comment and leave feedback, and you can collaborate with your team in the design, in the tool. It's absolutely fantastic. Check it out. Go to botmock.com/VUXworld for a free trial. Thank you everybody at BotMock.
Hello, and welcome to Lego Duplo Stories.
Today's guest is James Poulter, ex-head of emerging technology and platforms at Lego, one of the people who was involved and responsible for actually the creation of the Lego Duplo skill, which is a fantastic skill if you've got kids and Lego. Check it out because it is wicked. We're going to be talking today about his new venture, Vixen Labs, and more specifically actually not necessarily about Vixen Labs, but more around James's thoughts and the way that they're approaching voice and some of the observations around voice in the UK compared to the US. And the whole episode really is jam-packed full of strategic insight for brands and agencies who are starting to take voice seriously. 2019 is the year where voice steps up to the next level. It's not just about onlooking and watching and seeing what's going on and keeping your ear to the ground. 2019 is the year for people to jump in and get involved, and this episode is for you if you are one of those people, because it is absolutely cram-packed. We get probably through, I reckon probably a 2-hour conversation is squeezed into 50 minutes here, so do enjoy it. It's absolutely immense. Without further ado, ladies, this one actually, by the way, there's no Dustin here today because this one was a bit of an ad hoc one. It was supposed to be in person, but with the snowfall and the train situation, I wasn't managed to make it. So it's a little bit of a fumbling around and rearrangement, so we haven't managed to get Dustin along with us, but I think you're still going to love it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is James Poulter on VUX World.
VUX World. VUX World. VUX World. VUX World. Branding with the big faces. I love listening to it.
Kane Sims.
Kane Sims, the one and only.
Britain's finest, Mr. Kane Sims.
Dustin Coates.
I like it when you guys are together and talking about voice.
Without further ado,
Welcome to the show.
Cool. Well, here we are. James Poulter. It's been a long time coming, but this is it. Welcome to VUX World, mate.
I'm so pleased to be here, Kane. As you know, we've been following what you guys have been doing for a long time, and super respect everything that's been happening in the VUX world. So yeah, really pleased to be here.
Fantastic. And a lot has gone on since we first met, and over the last kind of year or so, I mean, you've been absolutely everywhere, all across every event I've seen, every event I've been to, you've been there, and you seem to be absolutely all over this voice thing. So tell the listeners of VUX World a little bit about yourself and some of the stuff that you've been up to in the voice space. Yeah,
so I basically started in this voice journey back at the start of 2017, really, when I was working at Lego, the toy company, many of you probably know of or have trodden on recently, where I was heading up emerging platforms and partnerships for Lego, which was a role looking at new technology and how it could be applied to creating content, changing business models and launching new channels. And voice was a really big thing on our agenda. I began to see, the uptick in people buying Alexa devices, people buying Google Home devices, and just thought that there was a real opportunity for this where it came to enhancing and making play more immersive for kids through audio and voice. And so that's where my interest kind of started when it came to the smart speaker side of things. But in reality, it goes back a long time. My love of kind of audio and radio started as a kid, and through to kind of adulthood, where I actually learned broadcasting and learned radio production, studied it as a degree at Westminster here in London, and then went on to launch a podcast production company off the back of that in 2007, which was probably a little bit ahead of the market, and probably was a little bit early, but taught me a lot. And now finally, kind of add a decade and a bit on, voice and audio is very much back at the forefront of everybody's mind. So that's the background. And we came bringing everyone kind of right up to speed was that I left Lego in October last year to set up Vixen Labs, which is a new consultancy, strategy, marketing, and VUX consultancy, essentially, that launched at the end of last year, at the end of 2018, with my co-founder and CCO Heape. And we've put that together to essentially bring more brands into the voice-first world.
Fantastic. And you also moderate and founded, along with Will Harvey, the WhatsApp group, the Voice2 WhatsApp group.
Yeah, the Voice2 community, which has taken on a life of its own. It was a thing that I started when I was at Lego because I was trying to find people that were working in this space, particularly here in the UK and across Europe, whereas most of the conversation I was seeing was predominantly in the US. And so we launched this through a single LinkedIn post linking to a WhatsApp community, and then lo and behold, within a couple of weeks' time, a couple of hundred people had showed up, and this thing took on a whole life of its own. And so it started as a community for people working in voice, and I think we're gradually in the process of pivoting it towards what we hope will become the kind of UK think tank on voice and conversational artificial intelligence, because there's just so many great minds in there, like yourself and Dustin, folks from the BBC Voice team, folks from the Guardian Voice team, many of your previous guests now all part of that community. And it's just going from strength to strength. So we started meetup groups, and we're looking at doing some research pieces in 2018 and some hackathons, and partnering with the big Voice Summit event that's happening in July in Newark, which I'm one of also now the program directors for. So real pleasure to just have all of these different voice things coming together. And it feels like 2019 will be the year that voice goes from experiment phase to proper critical business phase for many businesses. Excited to be a part of the community and to be able to operate in this space as well.
Yeah, it strikes me that, like, last year, I think it might have been Charlie Cadbury that mentioned, we had him on a podcast previously, and obviously he's a keen kind of member of the WhatsApp group as well. And I think one of his observations was that last year was a lot of brands kind of like just watching what was going on. Do you know what I mean? I've been thinking about it. The way I kind of like to think about it is that if there was a swimming pool in Darlington, in Darlow, called the Dolphin Centre when I was a kid, and we used to go there and it'd be like diving boards, a small board, a medium one, and a big one, and we'd all be jumping off and having fun, jumping off all the various diving boards and that. But there was always a few people who would be kind of just like watching on at the side of the pool. And I think last year seemed to be that there was a load of people having a whale of a time jumping off the diving board, but there was a load of brands that are kind of sitting at the side of the pool just watching what's going on. Is that still the case, or do you think that there's more momentum now and there's a lot more brands diving in?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a game of two halves, if I'm honest. So if you look at the US market right now, certainly partners of ours and friends running similar businesses in the States, I think, are seeing that 2019 is the year that big businesses are beginning to put voice as a line item on their marketing budget, or a line item in their business development or customer services budget, where they see it's becoming a necessary thing to have as part of their overall mix. In the UK and in Europe, I think we're probably somewhere between 6 and 9 months behind that as a market. We're seeing a lot of people that we're speaking to wanting to start off with either workshops or design sprints to look up the opportunity at this point of the year, but it may be something that they experiment with in 2019 rather than being business critical. And I think that as we head throughout the year, that is going to change. I think there's a steady kind of fast follow happening between the UK and the US in terms of the device adoption, as you guys have reported on a lot. And we'll see, I think, a lot more people begin to kind of get into the voice space more earnestly, probably for their 2020 planning in the UK. But in 2019, I think there's going to be a lot of people coming into the space, experimenting, launching skills and actions, all thinking about how they're going to be found from a voice search perspective. I think that's where a lot of interest is okay, well, these devices are now out there. My customer is beginning to look for me on these platforms. Where am I going to show up? And so we're beginning to see people wanting to get their strategy right, to do some design experimentation and working out what their different options are And then as they go into 2020, I think you'll begin to see those things actually being firm budgets and you know, line items, and potentially even some owners. I remember on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago seeing someone asking, you know, are we going to see people beginning to be given the voice mandate with an actual job title inside companies? And I think we're still a little way away from that. It's pretty comparable to where social media was a decade ago, that this was the thing that the advertising and the PR folks were fighting over. And then over time, you saw social media agencies, social media executives, those types of job titles beginning to emerge. I think we're still at that stage here in 2019 for voice. I think 2020 will probably be more the time that you begin to see that, certainly in Europe. In the US, however, we are beginning to see people being given the mandate to own these things, outside of just the people that you might traditionally assume, like the broadcasters and the news journalists and news organisations. So I think that's where I see the market right now.
So in terms of the people who are owning these things, where is it sitting then from your experience? Is it more along the lines of the marketing department or the CMO, or is it more of a technology thing? Whereabouts does this thing tend to sit?
I think you see it coming from probably three main areas. One would be innovation functions inside businesses where they're large enough to have that or have dedicated resources. It's seen as a R&D project, a research project, to work out, you know, different business issues. That's one particular line, and that tends to be being powered by business cases that come from either consumer or customer experience teams or customer services in many cases. The second is obviously marketing. Marketeers seeing the opportunity to market their product through voice, to develop their own voice products themselves, or are just going after a PR splash by launching a skill that does something entertaining. So we definitely see that. Then there's the third area, which is specific more to a vertical, but is editorial teams. And editorial teams, that might be editorial teams within brands. Certainly we're seeing that in a few spaces where some brands are wanting to think about content opportunities through voice, but particularly if you're looking at the news organisations, so if you're looking at the likes of the News UKs, or as I mentioned, the BBC, standing up entire teams where they're looking at how are they going to get content out. And so content teams are probably the main space. That's certainly on the client side. On the agency side, we are beginning to see digital teams begin to pitch this work to their clients. And I think you will begin to see that kind of scrabble for who should own it happen in the agency world later this year. I think there's a few obvious people that are well placed for it, particularly communications agencies, interestingly, because they are so used to writing content, long form content in many cases in the form of, you know, press releases and things like that. But also that many of those agencies are the ones that did win the social media battle, owning things like community management, writing content for social media. Those types of people have been used to writing conversations that they're having with real consumers, whether that's community managers or content editors. So I think you're going to see that debate happening as well. And then obviously the third entrant being, you know, kind of voice first agencies like ourselves at Vixen, or, you know, some of the other players that we're beginning to see enter into the space.
Do you think then that, so on the agency side, we'll flip back to the brand side in a minute, because I've got another couple of questions around the most appropriate use cases or how brands are thinking about use cases. But while we're on the agency side of things, I've seen a couple of agencies who have incorporated voice, you know, digital agencies, social media agencies, SEO agencies, brought voice into the fold almost like a subset of their product offering. And then we're starting to see places kind of like pop up, like Vixen Labs, like Rabbit and Pork, who are dedicated voice agencies. Now, what do you see, and how can you see that panning out? Is it going to be something that is brought into the fold more so than anything else, or is it going to be something that is going to be big enough to actually be standalone, dedicated organisations that do solely this? I
think it's following a similar trajectory, as I mentioned, to the social media landscape. If you go back 10 years, there were different big agency groups launching their own offerings. When I was at Ogilvy in the early days in 2008, 2009, you know, we had 360 Digital Influence, which was beginning to offer social media as part of the agency mix. But then at the same time, you had startups like 1,000 Heads and We Are Social entering into the space. You've had obviously, you know, chats with some of these people that have worked in these businesses back in the day, and you see that those entrants then grow to essentially become social media first agencies, but then pick up other work streams as well. And I wouldn't be too surprised if the voice world followed that trajectory. I think the key difference that we're trying to put into the market and many of the other voice first agencies is that there is a unique difference of designing for conversation versus designing for advertising. You're trying to make a more human interface essentially, and that's what we really believe in, is like create that voice is the most human thing that we can use right now to interact with our technology. You know, we learn to use use it before we touch or type or tap anything. We learn to speak as kids, and then throughout our lives we use that as our dominant way of interacting with people, whether that's in written format or in spoken word. And that is now an opportunity for us when it comes to managing our technology and using our technology is through voice. So designing for conversation is a really unique thing, as you know, right? All of your guests, the way you speak about, kind of designing VUX, the voice user experience is a unique experience. It is about inhabiting a physical voice and using that. It's about using natural language. And some of this stuff just doesn't lend itself naturally to some of the more advertising-based, kind of backgrounds. So I think there will be an opportunity for voice teams, perhaps within agencies or standalone agencies like ourselves to kind of begin to enter into the market. And I think you'll very quickly, I'm sure, see a lot of M&A in this space, a lot of acquisitions going on, and probably some kind of hefty moves by some of the bigger players. But with so many of the big agency networks at the moment in kind of different turmoils of their own, I think there are other things that they're focusing on right now.
You mentioned there the difference between advertising and the difference between design for voice. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it strikes me that kind of the best use cases for voice seem to be something that actually solves a purpose and provides genuine value that tends to actually, fit in around the user, whereas advertising more so seems to be almost like broadcasting or trying to craft something that encourages a particular behaviour. Is that the primary kind of difference, or is there something distinctly unique about voice in comparison to other forms of marketing?
I think we see three real interesting cases for how voice can help people. The first would be to make an experience more immersive, something that you're doing every day, but you could make it a more immersive or more engaging way of doing it. Take cooking as the obvious use case for many of us, putting the smart speakers in our kitchens. You can solve problems for people and make things kind of easier, like recipes, for example, in that space. We've seen a lot of people enter into food brands or restaurant brands entering in and trying to do recipes, for example, and that's a utility and it's helpful. But you can make those experiences more immersive as well. I often use the case if I'm in the kitchen, I don't always follow a recipe. My wife does, she's a recipe follower, but I tend to just look in the fridge and pick out a bunch of things and decide to make something that I'm interested in. And like last night when I was throwing together some tacos or enchiladas or something like that, I would have loved to have been able to say to Alexa, play, I'm making Mexican tonight, play something that will kind of make me feel happy when I'm cooking. And that might be a playlist of Mexican music, but it might also be Thomasina Myers, kind of the founder of Oaxaca, walking through the streets of Oaxaca talking about how to find the best peppers or something like that. That can make that experience of cooking Mexican food in my kitchen a more immersive one. So that's one particular area. Then it's the utility side, right? It's provide recipes, and I think that's a really interesting space. Or just make any complex thing that has multiple steps to it simpler. That's like onboarding processes if you're a big bank or a mortgage lender, or it's onboarding people into energy and utilities, or making those types of things easier. So utility is one, immersion is another, and then straight entertainment is the third obvious category. And we've seen so many people enter in to the likes of kind of interactive storytelling and other types of content medium, as well as obviously music on these devices. So I think there are some really obvious kind of catch-all use cases, and I think we're just very much not even at the end of the beginning when it comes to the various different ways that people will exploit these new platforms. But we certainly see some obvious use cases for marketeers, if you're particularly in that kind of space, to come in. How can you make your brand more immersive? How can you make your brand simpler, or get customers interacting with you in an easier way, or just straight up entertainment? If you can do any of those three things, you can potentially begin to win when it comes to using voice.
I mean, there's been some really good examples of using voice for a marketing function, and even some of the people in the WhatsApp group and some of the things that have been shared in there, the Talisker tasting experience, for example, the O2 parents versus kids experience. Lots of good examples. Is there anything in particular that you are, any particular area that you're trying to encourage brands to get involved in, or is there any particular things that you've seen recently that are really good examples of really good use cases and well executed use cases?
Yeah, I mean, I take one example that launched at the end of last year, not something that we were involved with, but just a really admirable case, is the likes of Virginchain trains. For listeners outside the UK, Virgin, obviously you may know them from all sorts of things, but they are a train operator as well in the UK, one of Richard Branson's many companies in the Virgin Group. And they launched a skill towards the end of last year which allows you to do basically everything you could want to do with booking a train ticket. So you can get your train times, you can book train tickets, you can pay for those tickets through Amazon Pay on the Alexa platform. You can even set up things like recurring tickets, your regular journeys and stuff like that. And what they've done is taken a bunch of stuff that is infinitely often quite complex. If anyone's trying to book a train ticket on a website, you've got lots of dials and knobs. How many people are coming? What time do I want to leave? What time am I arriving? These are all things that actually, if you were just to say it to a speaker, would be a very natural thing to ask. I want the 10 o'clock train from Leeds Bradford to London on Tuesday for 2 people. That is much quicker to say than going in and adjusting all of these different knobs and dials, and the Virgin skill delivers pretty well on that. And as a result, they've had some pretty positive ratings and reviews over on the Alexa store if you go take a look. So that's just one example. And I think that any of those types of utilities, like I mentioned, if you've got a complex user journey, if you've got a lot of stages, or if it's buried 3 or 4 menus deep in your website, maybe there might be a query that someone could ask where you could surface that information more quickly. Or in a more empathetic and emphatic way where you can entertain them in the process. And that's where I think that, particularly the Virgin example, really using the Virgin tone of voice, being very jovial, being very friendly and approachable, even though they're using the Alexa voices, is a really great case study. So we're seeing more and more kind of utility companies, public service providers, networks like rail and transport, kind of coming into the space because there's an opportunity to provide utility in an empathetic way and in a way that's just far simpler than a lot of these other interfaces that otherwise we have to not just use but put up with in our lives.
There is one thing about that Virgin skill that I found, and I don't want to I'm not in the position to really critique things, I don't think, but I did this about the Domino's skill at an event I was at last year, and it was full of designers, so I had to check that the designer of that skill wasn't in the room before I said something. But one thing about that I noticed, I was doing a workshop the other week, and we tested this skill to give a demonstration of this kind of transactional skill. And if you go down the route of trying to check a time, and you'll find, so I was trying to get a train from London to Edinburgh, you check a time, it'll give you the time, and then if you want to book the train, it doesn't let you do it. You need to hop back up to the top of the tree and go back down the booking side of the skill. And then when you get to go and search for a train to actually book, the times were different.
Yeah, and I mean this is the issue that some of these skills are already having. And I think that on your recent episode when talking with the founder at Tellables, right, she talked about her chocolate box skill and how there are different invocations that you use across different pathways within the skill, and those can sometimes be confusing. So some of the pathways that you're building into some of these actions and skills right now, they may require very similar language to try and get to the same answer. And if you try and use them, then a consumer might be jumped into the wrong part of a skill. Now, I've not dissected the Virgin thing in its entirety, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are some of those kind of limitations still built into the models at this point. The voice models are still relatively primitive, getting smarter all the time, but until we get some of that more continuous logic built into the platforms where the memory of what you asked previously can be recalled back through Alexa to answer the next question in a more consistent fashion, then we might see some limitations there. I'd say though that there are a number of these skills that are trying to do similar things, and I think the Virgin one's quite interesting because it takes into account a number of factors. There's another skill in the train space called train lines, train times, which is quite helpful with doing things like predicting how long it might take for you to get to your train station before you get the train, which obviously if you're using the thing in your home, it's pretty helpful. You don't just want to know what's the next train if you've got a 20-minute journey to get to the station, right? So context awareness is the big play here. The skills and those businesses that are building logic on top of the platforms that help provide more context, I think, are some of the most valuable bits of tech that we require when building these experiences right now, because we need that better understanding of the context in which the user is asking the question. And so that if you can retain that context through the experience, then you get a much better experience at the other end. I think that will come in time, and we're beginning to see the first fruits of some of that with the most recent updates to both the Alexa and Google platforms. But there's still a little bit of way to go, I expect.
I don't want to disparage the Virginchain skill, because it is the first example of something that is truly transactional, and it does work. You can book a ticket, and actually I was a bit scared of actually going through right to the very end, but then I found out later, because I didn't want to spend 150 quid on a ticket and then have to try and claim it back. But they are giving refunds actually. Because it's a new platform, they're offering refunds. If you do book through Alexa, you can actually get a refund, which is quite cool.
And I believe they also gave away the first 100 tickets that were booked through Alexa as well, which was a great, kind of user onboarding experience as well. So, book through something and get it free is never a bad way. So I think incentivizing people to do some of this purchasing to kind of begin to build that, kind of familiarity and trust in the platform that it's okay to book it. It's not too dissimilar from people beginning to first use their mobile to do Apple Pay or things like that. My wife will still not just take her phone out rather than her wallet when she can use Apple Pay pretty much everywhere for everything, because she's just worried she's going to walk into that one cafe that doesn't accept it and it doesn't work, and then she's left stranded without money. And I think that we're still even way further and way earlier in the voice space of trusting that it's okay to buy things through these things outside of potentially just the Amazon baked in, kind of purchasing through Amazon.com or .co.uk in our case. So I think that is one of those things that we will see more people do over time, absolutely, but it's still pretty early in the journey.
I think it was it might have been on Tom Ollerton's Shiny New Object podcast, and it probably was the one that you were on relatively recently, where it was a flippant comment and it didn't go any further than this, but I wanted to get your thoughts on it. It was something along the lines of, and I think you mentioned it earlier on actually in the conversation around voice. At the moment feels similar to what social was, and I think the quote that was in the podcast was that when brands were trying to experiment with social, they quickly found out that not everyone wants to have a relationship with the toothpaste.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, and I don't think everyone wants to talk to their toothpaste either.
Exactly. So Virgin Trains, that's a logical example, isn't it? We sell train tickets. Let's just sell train tickets. Is there a cutoff or a place where certain brands will be excluded from this or have trouble with this, or is voice literally that open and that accessible that any brand potentially can find a use case and succeed over here?
I wouldn't want to rule anyone out at this stage, because I think the things are so early, and I think particularly the promise that multimodal devices offer us is that through things like AI-based recommendations, through visual cues and prompts, nearly every business has been able to find a way into, for example, the mobile and app space. I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't a role for multimodal to help many businesses that may exclude themselves into the voice first area, and they may be voice first but not voice only based products. I think though that there are some really obvious categories that lend themselves so well. I was at the Alexa conference a couple of weeks ago in Tennessee, where Dustin was as well, and we saw some really obvious verticals begin to emerge. Healthcare being a really obvious one, healthcare and wellness more generally. Utilities, as I mentioned, beginning to see some companies offer bespoke things for utility companies, and media and entertainment. The guys from Jonathan Myers and the Earplay team there with the team from Capstone demonstrating kind of interactive storytelling. We see some of these verticals begin to exist. So I wouldn't want to rule anyone out at the moment. The biggest thing though, we're advising brands is that just because you can enter the space doesn't mean that you should immediately. And we said the same thing to social media back in the day, and to app marketing as well, is that it's way better to do one thing really, really well than try and replicate your entire experience from any other platform into voice. And I think that that's where we're advising a lot of clients at Vixen Labs at the moment to start small. Find the one thing that this voice thing really works well for. For example, like frequently asked questions on your business, times and locations of opening hours, things like onboarding experiences where you need to do a bit of data capture that you can maybe kick someone out to an email afterwards. These are straightforward conversational things that are natural for a user to do, and start and just do those things really well. Don't try and replicate everything that your app can do, because voice has some of these natural limitations. We can't recall loads of options. It's like any bad menu tree that you've been through where you're option 1, 2, 3, 4, and by the time you're at 7 you're like, well, what was option 1 and 2 again? So if you're trying to provide too much utility in one go, people just won't be able to remember it. And so I think that trying to pick one or two things that work really well and build those use cases around it, then you'll earn a lot of favors with customers, and then you can introduce new things later down the line and you'll get repeat customers out of it. But I think where a lot of people are failing right now is they're trying to do too much too soon, and they're giving a bad experience, and then users just aren't coming back. And I think that that's not doing the industry on a more broad basis any favors. So yeah, start small, build well. I think that there's hardly any business that can't find one example where that might be useful for them.
How do you strike the balance between starting small and providing value? So let's take the FAQ example. You presumably, if you're going to do something along the lines of FAQs, or just at least open the front door in the kind of voice environment to your brand, you're not necessarily going to have every single available FAQ in there, and there may be that obviously over time you'll learn how to iterate it and other features to add into it. But how do you strike that balance between starting small and narrow versus providing value to the user, something that will be used either repetitively or something that you can prove will add kind of value? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple of things. I mean, particularly you take FAQs, that just as a good example that you brought back up there. Every customer service team that I've ever worked with in a business or advised as an agency partner, when you ask them, well, where does 90% of your volume come through to your call center, for example, it's usually around about 10 to 12 of the same questions that get asked and answered, and most of those are straight data-driven questions. So if you can answer 90% of those things through voice and begin to move that away from call centers, which are often very expensive to run, and often kind of very cumbersome, then you could potentially find an answer for yourself. Now, of course, the thing that we said, the same thing of social media, of doing customer service on Twitter and things like that, which is why I see so many analogies to the social world, is that people were like, oh, I don't just want to talk to some kind of faceless robot through Twitter. But the difference is that doing through voice is that you can put the real voices of these people that would have otherwise dealt with you, or other characters, brand personalities and other people, to answer those questions on behalf of your business in a way that is far more empathetic than the kind of average answer that you're going to get through a direct message on Twitter, or kind of through even a menu option on a call center button, because it's a natural dialogue, and there can be follow-up and repetition. So I think that that's where there is a big opportunity for things like FAQs and those simple utilities. The big thing, though, that a lot of businesses need to probably get right before they can launch some of this stuff is actually getting their data in better shape. And that's where I think we're in some of the conversations we're having with clients right now, is things like getting structured APIs built around your customer data, through things like login data and single sign-ons, and through structuring your things like location data or product data, so that you can actually call dynamic data more easily into voice experiences, so that then you don't have to build every single permutation possible in your voice models, but you can do more open-ended questions and be able to call those things back. And that requires some effort up front, but it pays off in the long term, because it gives you so much more variety in the types of things that you can answer through a voice experience.
The next question I was going to ask there is, what are some of the other challenges? Maybe we'll hold that for a sec, because I want to just skip back to when you were talking about some of the parities between voice and social media. And I think one of the things that gets kind of said about voice is that everyone's waiting for this kind of like 1 in a million skill, the skill that's going to, or the action that's going to like revolutionize the world. And that one of the real keys to success is constant engagement, people returning and using your experience more and more. Social media, certainly in customer service, it's not necessarily about that, is it? It's more about just being there when someone needs you, and then solving the problem when you need you to solve it. So is that a similarity as well, or is it a case of a successful voice skill needs to be engaging so that people return, or can it just be there when you need it?
I think that it's kind of both and sorry, that's a cop-out of an answer, but there are different use cases, right? It's kind of horses for courses in this. That there are the types of things that if you're building a utility or a voice utility for, say, a utility company, that's something you actually don't want to have to engage with very often. But when you do, you sure as hell want to make sure it works. And so quality over quantity is super important. Whereas if you're a consumer brand and you want to remain top of mind, then, well, maybe voice isn't the best thing for doing that, because actually it doesn't have a visual presence. It's not something that is easily, recallable if it's not something you're going to use every day. People often cite things like you mentioned the Domino's skill or the Uber skill, things that you use regularly that is a simple point use case. That works really well, but just, I don't know what the utility is for, say, my Starbucks skill if I can't do something that is really entertaining with it. And so trying to find those use cases where you've got a reason to be in people's lives on a repetitive basis, then sure, that's going to help you build a great voice experience potentially. But no, I think it is quite similar to social media. There is one thing though that is very similar. I wouldn't say it's similar to social media. It's certainly similar to SEO. Is that we are still at the very early stage of essentially voice rank, if you want to coin a term. There you go, there's one, rather than page rank. And add to use your term came of v-commerce, not e-commerce. If you are a brand that wants to make sure that you are top of mind when a customer comes to search for you on voice, the earlier you are with the more robust experience and the more investment, there is definitely a first mover advantage there. Now that doesn't mean that someone can't come out and outrank you for an implicit invocation on Alexa, which is the invocations that when Alexa routes you to a specific skill based upon an implicit kind of request. It doesn't mean you can't be unseated from those spaces, but certainly being early with a quality experience that gets rated, reviewed, and reused definitely stands you in good stead. And that is very similar to the early days of building the biggest Facebook pages or building the earliest versions of PageRank on Google. Those that earned those top spots early tend to be the ones that have persisted over time, and it becomes increasingly more difficult to unseat them. So I think that you will see a few brands begin to move into this space so that they can be that presence, so that they can answer those questions for consumers when they ask them, and being there early with quality will hopefully pay off.
You were talking there just then about challenges before we kind of went on to the social media analogy. You were saying that brands don't necessarily have the data in the best shape, and that's sometimes a limitation. What are some of the other challenges that you've found that brands have, and for the brands listening, what do they need to be thinking about to overcome them challenges?
Yeah, there's definitely three obvious challenges. I like to do everything in threes if you've not picked up on that theme yet. I think that one of the things is this idea of the disappearing app I often talk about, is that as you, many listeners I'm sure will know if they're listening to the show, that one of the big problems that we're seeing at the moment is with skills in particular is that, once you've used them, they disappear into the ether. Sina Kahan, from the guys over at Vase, often talks about the idea of it being a 0-pixel real estate environment. That there is no visual marker or reminder that the skill exists, and so how do you bring it back? So building recall of what the skill is, and particularly what the specific utterance and invocations are that you should use, is super important. And so one of the big things we say to clients to overcome this is make sure that you're using other channels to drive awareness of what those invocations are, so you can actually build real recall around what those skills are. Back in the days of early kind of word of mouth marketing, we often talked about this idea that, particularly in PR, that it takes between 5 and 7 times for someone to hear something before they can actually remember it. So you're going to have to put in the work to get people to remember what your skill name and invocation is if you want them to bring it back up regularly and make sure it's there. I think the other thing that is a challenge is this idea that kind of around too many, the long menu problem. This idea of too many options. As I mentioned before, if you're building something that tries to do everything in one go, you're going to probably have difficulties. That people do find it quite difficult to recall lots of different options, and so boiling something down to its simplest form can seem like an easy thing to do, but actually it's super hard to kind of get to the purest version of what you're building. And so that is a challenge that we're asking people to overcome. And the way that we're doing that is really saying build small and then build up, rather than trying to kind of bite off all that you can chew. If you were to download an app from a bank tomorrow on your smartphone, you would expect it to do all the things that an app on your smartphone should do for a bank, right? You should be able to do transactions, you should be able to check your balance, you should be able to contact customer services, you expect it to do everything. There isn't a set standard for voice apps yet on what these things should do, and so better off to start small and provide one thing that does it really, really well, and then offer new things to consumers over time as they reuse it, rather than trying to provide everything and it become confusing and then they never come back. The third And final barrier, which I'll kind of offer, is that I think that there is a more macro issue around privacy that we're still trying to overcome. I've been in the room with a few innovation directors recently, people who are literally, it's their job to think about innovating for their business. And you'd be surprised at the amount of people that I've come up against who have said, yeah, I don't actually have one of these things at home because I'm worried about it listening to me all the time, which is slightly baffling, right? That these people, whose jobs it is to do this,
and also walk around with a phone in the pocket.
Well, there you go. But I think we have to begin to do better jobs at dispelling the myths about actually how this tech works, if we're actually going to reach consumer adoption. And I think that particularly after what we've seen, there was a study that came out, I think, from Accenture at the very start of the year that showed had a data point in it was fascinating. Was that for something like 40% of people that have smart speakers are worried that they're collecting more data on them than they need. And I think that is a really telling sign that despite the fact that we are buying these things and putting them in our homes, it's the opposite of the Big Brother 1984 kind of myth that Big Brother was going to come into our homes, backed by the government. We're going and buying the thing and putting it in the living room. But that still, though, we are still worried about that. We're still worried about the data capture. And I think that the story of the past decade or so of us handing over privacy in return for utility, particularly to the big social media companies, that value exchange has began to erode quite heavily in the wake of obviously things like Cambridge Analytica, and even in this week, kind of Facebook research app, revealing that they've been capturing kind of data from all sorts of people, and Apple having to remove it from the app stores. Those types of stories bleed through into this kind of bigger tech lash that we are seeing about people being worried about the data. So I think that there is an overall industry issue that we need to kind of work at. But you can combat some of that stuff in building these experiences, not being too data hungry, not going after everything where it requires lots of sign-ins and sign-offs to kind of get consumers using these things. Provide something that's simple, that provides utility early on, that does it really well and does it without having to be kind of too data hungry. Because if you come in like that, it's kind of like being a dinner party guest that kind of comes into your house and starts leaving doors open and kind of putting the toilet paper back on the roll the wrong way. It's just not like a good house guest. And that is not what these things should be. You're entering into somebody's home, often into some of the most private parts of their home, and speaking out loud into those environments. So if you can't do that in a way that shows up well, then you're going to cause real issues. So that's what we're advising people is, make sure that you do things that build recall, do something simple that is built upon over time, and do it in a way that is kind of courteous and behaves like a good guest when they come into the room.
Wicked. One last question. I know we're short on time, so we'll wrap this up. One last question. Vixen Labs doesn't just do the things that we've been talking about. You also help brands with the marketing and promotion of the voice experiences at the end of the process. So what are some either good, I know John Campbell shares examples of posters and tube banners and all this kind of stuff of places promoting Alexa skills and whatnot in the WhatsApp group, but what are either some examples of good promotion that you've seen, or some of the things that you've been advising clients to do in terms of getting the word out and in terms of actually promoting these voice experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things that we've seen a few examples of, we worked a little bit with the guys at Say It Now on the Talisker experience that you mentioned. Jen, my co-founder, did some work on the project. And one of the interesting parts of that experiment is that they actually did on-bottle stickering in the Talisker whiskey that was distributed to kind of A/B test whether or not it was a good experience. So actually, if you've got an on-pack opportunity, something that's sitting on someone's shelf every day, staring them in the face when they open the kitchen cabinet, why not put what the invocation or kind of utterance is of your skill on that packet? Because then it's something that people literally are looking at every single day, and that can build real recall around that. So if you've got that opportunity. Secondly, if you've got like a physical placement, like an in-store experience, I think that the more that we see brands actually doing things like demoing Alexa skills for their products in stores or in retail locations or in kind of built environment where they can actually kind of get hands-on with it, it helps build the category overall. And then thirdly, I would say social media actually is a really good driver. One of the things that I did when I was at Lego as part of the campaign was we did a whole social media campaign around the Lego Alexa Duplo skill. So Duplo Stories was a skill that we built at Lego, which had 10 interactive stories for toddlers and their parents to play together whilst building with Duplo bricks. I know something that's entered into your world recently, Kane, so you can try it out live with the little one at some point. But one of the things that we did a lot of was marketing to parents through social media to let them know that skill existed through things like on pack and also in the box. But actually through social media was really important. So actually doing demo videos, doing additional imagery that's actually on your Amazon page. So if you've got a product on Amazon that the skill is linked to, utilizing things like A+ pages and additional video and imagery content on those Amazon product pages can be a real driver in kind of making people aware that the skill exists. Because as I say, otherwise these things are somewhat invisible until discoverability gets better in the Alexa store itself. So that would be my recommendation: is use in-store, use on social, and use on pack or on product if you can do, because wherever you can build that recall, you're definitely going to get a better result.
Fantastic. I will recommend everyone to try the Lego skill. I know we haven't had really a chance to get into detail about that, but it is fantastic, so I'll definitely link to it in the show notes. Do check it out, it's fantastic.
Well, thank you. Yeah, if people want to try it out, just say, Alexa, open Lego Duplo Stories. There you go. Everybody who's got kids skills enables devices are now kind of going off like crazy.
You've just shot them out of the podcast into the Lego skill there. Fantastic. James, this has been an absolute pleasure. It's been a really, really stimulating discussion, and I'm absolutely over the moon that we've had a chance to do it. It was better. I knew it was going to be good, but it's even better than I thought it was going to be, so thank you so much for joining us.
Can I just do 2 quick plugs? Or 3 quick plugs. I'll be really fast with them. One was that you mentioned the Voice.2 community. That is a non-profit, completely separate thing that we run just to kind of keep people connected. If they want to join that, if you go to voice.2, the number 2.io, you can register for the newsletter and to join the WhatsApp community there. And if you're coming to Voice Summit, we would love you to come out and join us in New Jersey in the week of the 22nd of July. It's the voicesummit.ai is the website for that. And if you want to find out more about Vixen Labs, then it's vixenlabs.co, and you'll find us on all the socials around that as well.
Fantastic. And all of them links, as always, will be in the show notes. Do check it out. James, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Kane. Really appreciate it.
That was James Poulter. Thank you, James, for joining us. It's been a long time coming, that conversation, and absolutely buzzing we had to have it. I think we've managed to squeeze probably about 3 hours worth of content into 40 minutes there, so I think we've done pretty well. Such an interesting conversation that, from anyone who is, whether you're on the brand side and client side, or whether you're on the agency side, or even if you're just thinking about, creating your own business, or whether you're a hobbyist, or whatever the case may be, I think there's so many strategic insights in that discussion just there. Really good observations in terms of prevalent use cases. I enjoyed the 3. James does things in 3s. I like that. That's voice first straight away. You don't want to overload people with too much. Keep it in 3s. So in terms of some of the use cases and some of the areas where voice is useful, 1, making an experience more immersive. 2, utility, which we've touched on with Sina Carhen on the podcast over the last couple of weeks, and 3, entertainment. And I totally agree with that, and there's some really good examples of skills and actions in all of those 3 categories that have been coming around recently. In terms of the verticals, I think pretty much what James was saying there, and I agree as well, that every vertical has opportunities, should we say, from healthcare to utilities to media and entertainment, you name it, retail obviously. Such opportunity there. But as ever, it's a recurring theme on this podcast, and a recurring theme amongst all voice content that you'll probably find yourself running into. The advice is, start small. Pick something fairly simple that still adds value, and start small, and then scale and iterate and build on it. Fantastic advice. Really good to see some of the similarities as well between social and voice. I think that on the podcast, I think we've mentioned, and lots of people say that voice is similar to mobile when it first started kind of taking off in terms of the scene and the industry and the enthusiasm and passion shown by everybody. But it was interesting to see some of the observations from James around how brands are approaching voice and how that's similar to social. So that was a fantastic observation. do check out the Lego skill if you've got kids. Even if you don't have kids, I wasn't even with the kid when I was playing with it, and I was just enjoying the experience. So do check it out. Do check out the Voice.2 community. I'm not just saying this; it is a genuinely fantastic place. I'm a part of it, and it's got so ingrained in my life that I just call it the WhatsApp group. I think that's the biggest compliment I can pay to it. Is I don't even say Voice.2, I just say the WhatsApp group, because that's the default WhatsApp group that I'm mostly part of. I use that WhatsApp group more than I text any of my friends or family, and even my wife. I'm texting that WhatsApp group more than anything else. So join it, get onto it. voice..io. Check out Vixen Labs as well if you do need help on the strategic side of voice and you need help on the marketing side. Check out Vixen Labs and do reach out to them. And obviously the Voice Summit that's coming up. Unfortunately, I'm going to be away. I'm going to be on a cruise. My brother-in-law is getting married, and it's not the kind of thing that you can get out of to go on a round the world trip to America. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be there, but do get yourself there, because this is probably the biggest voice event of the year, and you don't want to miss it like me. So do check it out. voicesummit.ai. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been absolutely fantastic. James, thank you so much. Boys and girls, thank you for listening, and until next time, see you later.
Okay, thanks for playing Lego Duplo Stories. You can come back anytime you want to build more adventures with your Duplo bricks. See you then. Goodbye.